He thought she was just another nobody in the courthouse hallway. Officer Vance Harlan, fueled by a dangerous cocktail of a badge, a bruised ego, and deep-seated prejudice, decided to assert his dominance the only way he knew how. With cruelty, he kicked her, threw a slur disguised as a sneer, and walked away laughing, thinking he was untouchable. He didn't know the quiet black woman taking notes on the floor wasn't a defendant, a victim, or a bystander. She was his absolute worst nightmare. Stick around, because the moment the precinct doors swing open for the new chief of police, a reckoning begins that will leave you breathless. The air inside the Monroe County Courthouse always smelled faintly of floor wax, stale coffee, and quiet desperation. Officer Vance Harlan of the Oak Ridge Police Department loved the courthouse. To him, it was a stage, and he was the undisputed star. He walked with a heavy, deliberate thud, his utility belt creaking, his thumbs hooked casually into his vest. He had just finished testifying in a minor possession case, successfully lying on the stand about probable cause to ensure a conviction. The judge hadn't questioned him. They rarely did. High on the adrenaline of his own fabricated authority, Harlan pushed through the heavy oak doors of Courtroom 3 and stepped into the crowded, echoing hallway. The corridor was packed with public defenders, nervous defendants, and exhausted families. Every wooden bench was full. Harlan hated the crowd. He hated the noise. But most of all, he hated feeling inconvenienced. He needed to get to the clerk's office at the far end of the hall to sign some paperwork, and a line of people spilling out from traffic court was blocking his direct path. Sitting on the edge of a bench right in his trajectory was a black woman. She appeared to be in her late 40s, dressed sharply but unassumingly in a beige trench coat over a dark navy turtleneck and tailored slacks. A leather portfolio rested on her lap, and she was entirely engrossed in reading a dense stack of legal documents. She wasn't loud. She wasn't in the way of anyone walking normally, but she was in Harlan's way. "Hey!" Harlan barked, not slowing his pace. "Move it!" The woman, Nadia Brooks, didn't immediately jump. She was currently reviewing the operational budget of the Oak Ridge Police Department, a budget riddled with overtime fraud and unaccounted for tactical expenditures. Hearing the sharp, disrespectful tone, she looked up, her dark eyes locking onto the badge, then moving up to Harlan's flushed, irritated face. "Excuse me, officer?" Nadia asked. Her voice was calm, steady, and devoid of the intimidation Harlan was used to seeing. "I said move," Harlan snapped, stopping right in front of her. He leaned in, letting his physical bulk loom over her. "This is a walkway, not a public library. Get your feet out of the aisle." Nadia looked down. Her feet were tucked neatly against the wooden legs of the bench. She was occupying exactly the space she was entitled to. "My feet aren't in the aisle, officer. There is plenty of room for you to walk around." Harlan felt a hot flash of anger prickle the back of his neck. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a black woman in a public space. In his warped mind, her calm defiance was a direct threat to his authority. He looked around. A few people were turning their heads, watching the interaction. His ego demanded a victory. "I don't care what you think there's room for," Harlan sneered, his voice dropping low, lacing his words with a toxic, condescending venom. "People like you always think the rules don't apply. You think you can just sit wherever you want, talk back to whoever you want. Get up." "I am waiting for the clerk's office to call my number," Nadia replied, her gaze hardening into something resembling polished steel. She did not raise her voice. She did not break eye contact. "I have a right to sit here." "Not anymore." Without another word, Harlan stepped forward, and with a sharp, vicious motion kicked the side of Nadia's right shin. He didn't just tap her. He put the weight of his heavy steel-toed tactical boot into it. The sudden, shocking impact sent a jolt of pain up Nadia's leg. The sheer force of the blow caused her to instinctively recoil, knocking her heavy leather portfolio off her lap. Hundreds of pages of departmental files, audits, and internal affairs reports scattered across the dirty linoleum floor in a chaotic slide of white paper. A gasp echoed from a nearby woman. A public defender stopped dead in his tracks, but nobody intervened. This was Oak Ridge, and Vance Harlan was a known commodity. Harlan let out a short, ugly laugh, looking down at the papers covering the floor. "Look at that," he mocked, a cruel smile stretching across his face. "Now, you have a reason to be on the floor. Pick up your garbage and learn some respect." Nadia did not scream. She did not cry. The pain in her shin was throbbing, a deep bruising ache, but her mind was entirely clear. She slowly lowered herself to the floor and began gathering her papers. As she reached for a page detailing civil rights lawsuit payouts, she looked up at Harlan. "Your name and badge number," Nadia said, her voice dropping 10 degrees, echoing with a chilling authority that Harlan was too arrogant to recognize. "Officer Vance Harlan, badge number 7442, he said proudly, tapping the silver shield on his chest. "File a complaint if you want, sweetheart. Tell them Harlan sent you. Let me know how that works out for you." He stepped carelessly over her scattered papers, leaving a dirty boot print on a document outlining the new chain of command, and strutted down the hallway, laughing to himself. He felt powerful. He felt completely in control. Nadia Brooks watched him walk away. She neatly stacked the papers back into her portfolio, ignoring the stinging pain in her leg. She brushed the dust off her slacks and stood up. She didn't bother going to the clerk's office anymore. She had seen all she needed to see of the Oak Ridge Police Department's culture. She pulled a sleek smartphone from her trench coat pocket and dialed a number. "Mayor Belmont," Nadia said when the line clicked open. "It's Hastings, Nadia." "Good morning," the mayor's voice boomed enthusiastically. "Are you in town? Are you ready for the big announcement at the precinct this afternoon?" "I am," Nadia replied softly, staring down the hallway where Harlan had disappeared. "In fact, I think I'm going to make a few immediate changes to the roster." The Oak Ridge Police Department's central precinct was a sprawling, brutalist concrete building that felt more like a fortress than a public service building. At shift change, the locker room was buzzing with the chaotic energy of officers coming and going. Lockers slammed, radios crackled with static, and the smell of cheap deodorant and stale sweat hung heavy in the air. Vance Harlan was holding court. He sat on the wooden bench in the center of the room, unlacing his tactical boots, surrounded by 3 younger officers who hung onto his every word like gospel. "I'm telling you, Cooper," Harlan said, pointing a finger at a rookie named Bradley Cooper. "You can't give an inch out there. Not an inch. They sense weakness, like today at the courthouse." "What happened at the courthouse?" Cooper asked, looking slightly uncomfortable but too intimidated to walk away. Harlan laughed, a harsh, abrasive sound. "Some lady thought she owned the hallway. Sat right in the middle, giving me lip when I told her to clear a path. You know the type. Entitled. Thinks the world owes her something." "So what did you do?" asked Officer Miller, leaning against a row of lockers. "I moved her," Harlan said, grinning. "Gave her a little tap with the boot. Sent all her little papers flying all over the floor. You should have seen the look on her face. Total shock." The other officers chuckled nervously, except for Cooper, who looked down at his boots. "Isn't that kind of risky, Harlan?" Cooper asked. "I mean, what if she actually files a complaint?" "Let her," Harlan roared, slamming his locker shut. "Internal affairs is run by Captain Davis. We play golf every other Sunday. Nothing sticks to me, kid. Remember that. We run this city. We are the law. We don't bow to the public. The public bows to us." The intercom on the wall suddenly crackled to life, interrupting Harlan's arrogant sermon. "Attention all personnel. The mayor's briefing and the introduction of the new chief of police will begin in the main assembly room in 5 minutes. All available officers, including off-going and oncoming shifts, are required to attend. Attendance is mandatory." Groans echoed throughout the locker room. "Great," Harlan muttered, adjusting his uniform shirt and checking his reflection in the mirror. Here we go. Another suit from out of town coming to tell us how to do our jobs. The rumors had been swirling for weeks. The previous chief had been forced into early retirement after a massive corruption scandal involving missing evidence and excessive force complaints. Mayor Richard Belmont, desperate to save his upcoming re-election campaign, had promised to bring in an outsider, a fixer with a spotless record and a reputation for ruthlessness. Nobody at Oak Ridge knew who it was. The mayor had kept the hire tightly under wraps. Harlan swaggered into the main assembly room, taking a seat in the second row. The room was packed with over 100 officers, detectives, and administrative staff. A podium stood at the front of the room, flanked by the city's flag and the department's colors. At exactly the appointed time, Mayor Richard Belmont walked onto the stage. He tapped the microphone, the feedback whining briefly before settling. "Good afternoon, Oak Ridge," the mayor began, his tone serious. The room fell silent. "We all know why we are here. The past year has been difficult for this department. Trust between law enforcement and the community is at an all-time low. We've had scandals. We've had failures of leadership. That ends today." Harlan rolled his eyes, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. He exchanged a knowing smirk with Miller. "Politicians," he thought. "All talk." "When I looked for a new chief," the mayor continued, "I didn't want someone who was going to maintain the status quo. I wanted someone who has faced down the worst kinds of corruption. Someone who served 20 years in Chicago PD, rising to deputy superintendent. Someone with a law degree, a master's in criminal justice, and absolutely zero tolerance for misconduct." The mayor turned toward the heavy side doors of the assembly room. "It is my profound honor to introduce the new absolute authority in this building, your new chief of police, Nadia Brooks." The side doors opened. The entire room stood up in unison, a chorus of shifting boots and rustling uniforms. Harlan stood up slowly, a bored expression on his face, ready to clap politely and get out of there. He looked toward the stage. A woman walked out from the shadows of the hallway and stepped up to the podium. She was dressed in an immaculate razor-sharp Class A uniform. The dark navy fabric was pressed perfectly. 4 shining silver stars gleamed on her collar. A gold shield rested over her heart. Harlan stopped breathing. The blood drained from his face so fast he felt dizzy. His heart, which had been beating with a slow, arrogant rhythm, suddenly hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The bored smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of absolute paralyzing terror. It was her. The beige trench coat was gone. The soft turtleneck was gone. But the face, the sharp jawline, the piercing dark eyes, the steady, unyielding expression was exactly the same. It was the woman from the courthouse hallway, the woman whose shin he had brutally kicked just hours ago, the woman whose papers he had stepped on. Chief Nadia Brooks stepped up to the microphone. She didn't look at her notes. She didn't look at the mayor. She looked out at the sea of uniforms. Slowly, deliberately, her eyes scanned the crowd. She swept past the detectives, past the lieutenants, past the rookies in the back, and then her gaze locked onto the second row. She found Vance Harlan. When her eyes met his, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. She didn't glare. She didn't smile. Her expression was utterly devoid of warmth, calculating and cold as a winter night. She held his gaze for 3 agonizingly long seconds. In that silence, Harlan felt the weight of his entire 15-year career collapsing in on him. He felt the phantom ache of his steel-toed boot hitting her leg, a memory that now felt like a death sentence. "Good afternoon," Chief Brooks finally said into the microphone, her voice ringing out clear and authoritative, the exact same tone she had used when asking for his badge number. "My name is Nadia Brooks, and as of this exact moment, everything you thought you knew about how this department operates is over. Harlan swallowed hard, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. The predator had just realized he was trapped in a cage, and the prey held the only key. The assembly room emptied in a heavy, suffocating silence. Usually the end of a mayoral briefing was met with loud chatter, complaints about new policies, and the scuffling of boots heading toward the exits. Today, the Oak Ridge Police Department filtered out like ghosts. Officer Vance Harlan remained glued to his plastic chair in the second row, his hands resting on his duty belt, visibly trembling. His mind raced back to the hallway. He remembered the sickening thud of his steel-toed boot connecting with her shin. He remembered her calm voice asking for his badge number. He remembered laughing in her face. She knows, he thought, panic gripping his chest. She looked right at me. She knows exactly who I am. He waited until the room was nearly empty before standing on shaky legs. He didn't go to the locker room to change. He bypassed the front desk entirely and took the back stairwell up to the third floor. He needed an ally. He needed the one man in the department who had made a career out of making officers' mistakes disappear. Harlan practically kicked open the door to the Internal Affairs Division, startling a young administrative assistant. He stormed straight into the corner office of Captain Richard Davis. Davis, a heavy-set man with a flushed face and a perpetually loosened tie, looked up from his computer monitor, annoyed. "Knock, Vance. For God's sake, people can see you." "Did you see her?" Harlan gasped, closing the blinds on the glass wall of the office before turning to face the captain. "Did you see the new chief?" "Yeah, I saw her," Davis scoffed, leaning back in his expensive leather chair. "Brooks, a political stunt by Belmont. Bring in the tough outsider from Chicago to clean up the good old boys. She'll make a few speeches, implement some sensitivity training, and in 6 months she'll be behind a desk, rubber stamping our reports just like the last guy. Relax." "You don't understand, Rick," Harlan said, his voice cracking. He leaned over the desk, his face pale and slick with sweat. "I met her today before the briefing at the courthouse." Davis frowned, sitting up slightly. "Met her? What do you mean?" Harlan swallowed hard, tasting bile. She was sitting on the bench blocking the hallway to the clerk's office. She wasn't in uniform. She looked like a nobody. Davis stared at him, the color slowly draining from his own face as he anticipated the punchline. "Vance, tell me you didn't." "I kicked her," Harlan whispered, the words sounding absurd and suicidal spoken out loud. "I kicked her in the leg, knocked all her paperwork on the floor, and then I gave her my name and badge number and told her to file a complaint." Silence stretched across the office, heavy and toxic. Davis ran a hand down his face, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. "You kicked the new chief of police," Davis summarized flatly. "On her first day." "I didn't know," Harlan pleaded. "She was in plain clothes. What is she going to do, Rick? Can you intercept the complaint? Can you bury it?" Davis stood up and paced the length of his office. His mind was calculating the fallout. He and Harlan had a mutually beneficial arrangement. Harlan did the dirty work on the streets, enforcing their brand of control, and Davis ensured the paperwork always reflected a clean shoot or a justified use of force. If Harlan went down, he might panic and drag Davis down with him. "Listen to me," Davis said, pointing a thick finger at Harlan. "She hasn't done anything yet. If she was going to fire you publicly, she would have done it on that stage to make an example out of you. The fact that she didn't means she's either bound by union protocols or she's trying to figure out how the department works before making a move. So what do I do?" "You keep your head down," Davis ordered. "You do your job exactly by the book. No shakedowns, no roughing up suspects, no lip to the brass. If she files a formal complaint, it has to come across my desk. I control the internal affairs docket. I'll tie it up in administrative review for months, but you cannot give her a reason to bypass me. Do you understand?" Harlan nodded frantically. "By the book?" "Yeah, okay." Meanwhile, on the top floor of the precinct, Chief Nadia Brooks sat behind the massive mahogany desk in her new office. The door was locked. She slowly rolled up the right leg of her dark navy trousers. Just below her knee, an ugly dark purple bruise the size of a baseball was already blossoming against her skin. It throbbed with a dull, constant ache. She stared at it for a long moment. It wasn't just a bruise. It was a symptom of a much deeper disease infecting Oak Ridge. Nadia had not stayed quiet on that stage out of fear or union protocol. She stayed quiet because firing Vance Harlan for a single assault wouldn't solve the problem. If she fired him today, the police union would appeal. Captain Davis would testify to his stellar character, and Harlan would be back on the streets with back pay in a year. No. Nadia didn't just want Harlan's badge. She wanted his pension. She wanted his freedom. She wanted to surgically extract the entire corrupt network that allowed a monster like him to thrive. She rolled her pant leg down, smoothed her uniform, and pressed the intercom button on her desk. "Send in Detective Jenkins, please." A moment later, the door opened, and a sharp-eyed woman in her late 30s walked in. Detective Elena Jenkins had a reputation that Nadia had thoroughly vetted before arriving. Jenkins was a brilliant investigator, but she had been systematically marginalized by the department's boys' club. She was routinely assigned cold cases and paperwork because she refused to falsify evidence to cover for officers like Harlan. "You wanted to see me, Chief?" Jenkins asked, standing at attention. "Sit down, Detective," Nadia said, motioning to the chair opposite her. "I'm going to get straight to the point. I reviewed the personnel files of every officer in this precinct over the weekend. Yours stood out. You have the highest closure rate on homicides, yet you've been passed over for promotion to lieutenant 3 times. Why?" Jenkins shifted uncomfortably. "With respect, ma'am, I think you'd have to ask Captain Davis and the promotion board." "I don't need to ask them. I know why," Nadia said smoothly. "You arrested an off-duty officer for a DUI 3 years ago instead of giving him a ride home. You broke the blue wall of silence, and they have punished you for it ever since." Jenkins' jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. "I did my job, and I need you to do it again." Nadia leaned forward, steepling her fingers. "I am launching a quiet internal audit, strictly off the books. I am looking into a pattern of excessive force, civil rights violations, and extortion. And the spider at the center of this web is Officer Vance Harlan." Jenkins' eyes widened slightly. "Harlan? Ma'am, Harlan is protected. He's Davis's golden boy. Any investigation into him goes through internal affairs, and Davis will kill it before you even see the file." "Davis won't see this file," Nadia replied, her voice turning to ice. "Because you are going to build it for me, bypassing internal affairs entirely. I want every arrest report Harlan has filed in the last 5 years. I want to cross-reference his resisting arrest charges with hospital admission records. I want the names of every local business owner he interacts with on his beat." "Chief," Jenkins said slowly, realizing the gravity of what was happening, "if they find out we're doing this, they will try to ruin us. Both of us." Nadia stood up, walking around the desk. She looked out the window at the sprawling city of Oak Ridge. "Detective Jenkins, earlier today, Officer Harlan kicked me in the leg at the courthouse because I didn't move fast enough for him. He thought I was just a citizen he could abuse without consequence." Jenkins gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "He assaulted you, Chief. You can arrest him right now." "If I arrest him now, I get one bad cop," Nadia said, turning back to face her. "If we do this my way, we get them all. Are you in?" Jenkins looked at the new chief. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of genuine hope for the city. She stood up, squaring her shoulders. "I'm in." 2 weeks passed. For Officer Vance Harlan, they were the most agonizing 14 days of his life. He jumped every time his radio crackled. He checked his locker daily for a pink slip. He avoided the top floor of the precinct like a plague. But as the days ticked by and nothing happened, Harlan's natural arrogance began to creep back in. He hadn't been called into the chief's office. He hadn't been suspended. Captain Davis had smugly assured him that Brooks was too busy dealing with the city council's budget committees to care about a minor altercation in a hallway. "She's scared," Harlan finally convinced himself as he strapped on his Kevlar vest for a Tuesday evening shift. "She realized who runs the streets. She knows she can't touch me without the union burning the city down." Harlan walked out to his cruiser, tossing his gear into the trunk. His partner, rookie Bradley Cooper, was already in the driver's seat, double-checking the dash cam. "All right, kid, let's roll," Harlan said, sliding into the passenger seat and resting his boots on the dashboard. "Take us down through the industrial district. We need to pay a visit to Arthur Pendleton." Cooper tensed. "Pendleton's auto body? We don't have a call out there, Harlan." "It's called proactive policing, Cooper," Harlan sneered. "Arthur's been getting sloppy. Lots of cash transactions. I want to make sure he's keeping his nose clean." In reality, Arthur Pendleton was a hard-working, middle-aged man who ran the most successful independent garage in the district. But because his business operated largely in cash, Harlan had been running a protection racket on him for 3 years. Once a month, Harlan would show up, threaten to audit Arthur's parts inventory for stolen goods, or threaten to cite him for zoning violations regarding parked cars on the street. To make him go away, Arthur would slip him $500 in an unmarked envelope. It was easy money. Cooper drove them down to the rusted chain-link gates of Pendleton's auto body. The sun was just starting to set, casting long, dark shadows across the rows of half-repaired vehicles. "Park in the back," Harlan instructed, out of sight from the main road. As the cruiser rolled to a stop, Harlan reached up to his chest and pressed the button on his body camera. A small beep indicated the device was powered down. "Turn yours off," Harlan ordered Cooper. "Harlan, the new policy Chief Brooks put out says we can't." "I said turn it off, rookie," Harlan barked, glaring at the younger man. "Unless you want me to write you up for insubordination. We're having a private conversation with a business owner. It's a technical malfunction. Got it?" Reluctantly, Cooper reached up and powered down his camera. Harlan climbed out of the car, strutting toward the open garage doors. The familiar smell of motor oil and metallic dust filled the air. Arthur Pendleton was wiping his hands on a greased rag near a lifted Chevy. When he saw Harlan approach, his shoulders slumped. "Officer Harlan?" Arthur said, his voice tight. "We're closed." "You're never closed to the Oak Ridge PD, Artie." Harlan smiled, a predatory gleam in his eye. He walked around the Chevy casually, kicking one of the tires. "Place looks busy. Lots of inventory. You got the proper receipts for all these catalytic converters?" "You know I do," Arthur said, taking a step back as Harlan invaded his personal space. "I don't know anything, Artie," Harlan whispered, crowding the man against the side of the car. "What I do know is that a city inspector could come down here tomorrow, shut off your power, and lock your gates while they investigate a tip about stolen property. That would cost you thousands. It would be a real shame." Arthur looked down at the concrete floor. "I don't have the envelope today, Harlan. Business has been slow. I have a mortgage." Harlan's face darkened. The brief flash of anger he felt in the courthouse hallway returned. He grabbed Arthur by the collar of his greasy overalls and shoved him hard against the side of the truck. "I don't give a damn about your mortgage," Harlan hissed. "You pay the tax or I shut you down. Have it by tomorrow night or I'm putting you in handcuffs for resisting arrest. Are we clear?" Harlan let go, smoothing his uniform shirt as Arthur coughed, nodding frantically. "Good man." Harlan smiled, turning around to walk back to the cruiser. He felt invincible. He had his power back. The new chief hadn't changed a thing. Oak Ridge was still his playground. He climbed back into the cruiser, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire career had just been signed away. Inside the small, cluttered back office of the garage, the blinds were drawn. Sitting in the dark, bathed in the glow of a high-definition surveillance monitor, was Detective Elena Jenkins. Next to her sat a technician from the FBI's regional field office. The monitor displayed a crystal-clear 4K video feed of the garage floor, captured from a camera hidden inside a smoke detector. Another feed showed the audio waveform, having recorded every single word Harlan just said through a parabolic microphone hidden in a stack of tires. Jenkins pressed a button on her secure radio. "Chief Brooks, we have it. Clear audio and video of extortion, assault, and premeditated tampering with departmental equipment." He forced the rookie to shut down his camera. Miles away in her office, Chief Nadia Brooks stood looking out of a window at the city lights. A cold, satisfied smile crossed her face. She had spent 2 weeks quietly utilizing her federal contacts, pulling favors to secure a localized federal wiretap warrant that entirely bypassed the local judges in Oak Ridge, who were friendly with Captain Davis. "Excellent work, Detective," Nadia said softly into her phone. "Secure the files onto an encrypted drive. Do not log them into the precinct's evidence room. Bring them directly to my house." "And Harlan?" Jenkins asked. Nadia's eyes narrowed, reflecting the distant city lights. "Let him sleep soundly tonight. Let him think he won. Tomorrow morning we don't just spring the trap. We burn down the whole forest." Wednesday morning broke over Oak Ridge with a deceptive calmness. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Officer Vance Harlan swaggered into the precinct at the appointed hour, holding a large iced coffee, feeling like a king surveying his domain. Last night's collection from Arthur Pendleton's garage had been a resounding success. The envelope of cash was currently sitting in a lockbox in Harlan's basement, tax-free and untraceable. As he walked through the bullpen, Harlan slapped a few shoulders, laughed too loudly at a stale joke, and completely ignored the tense electric undercurrent humming through the administrative staff. He was untouchable. The new chief hadn't made a single move against him. The incident at the courthouse was ancient history in his mind, a momentary blip of disrespect that he had correctly put down. At the appointed time, the precinct's overhead PA system crackled to life. It wasn't the usual dispatcher's voice. It was the sharp, commanding tone of Detective Elena Jenkins. "Attention, Captain Richard Davis, Officer Vance Harlan, and Officer Bradley Cooper. Report to Interrogation Room A immediately. This is not a request." Harlan stopped dead in his tracks, his coffee cup pausing halfway to his mouth. He looked across the bullpen and locked eyes with rookie Bradley Cooper, whose face had instantly drained of all color. Cooper looked like he was about to be physically sick. "Relax, kid," Harlan muttered, walking over to him. "It's probably just a routine debrief on that warehouse burglary from last week. Keep your mouth shut. Let me do the talking. Davis will be there. We're golden." They made their way down the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridor toward the interrogation wing. When they arrived at Room A, Captain Davis was already standing outside, looking irritable and nervously adjusting his tie. "What is this, Rick?" Harlan asked in a low whisper. "I don't know," Davis snapped. "Jenkins bypassed my desk to call this. Brooks must have put her up to it. Just remember, deny, deflect, and demand union representation if they start asking about procedural stuff. I am the head of internal affairs. They can't discipline you without my signature." Davis pushed the heavy metal door open. The room was not set up for a routine debrief. The metal table in the center had been pushed against the wall. Standing in the center of the room was Chief Nadia Brooks, her uniform immaculate, her posture radiating absolute authority. To her right stood Detective Elena Jenkins, holding a thick, securely bound manila folder. But it was the man standing to Brooks's left that made the blood freeze in Captain Davis's veins. He was wearing a sharp, tailored charcoal suit, and a badge was clipped to his belt. A badge that did not belong to the Oak Ridge Police Department. "Gentlemen," Chief Brooks said, her voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "Close the door." Harlan stepped inside, his bravado rapidly evaporating as the heavy steel door clicked shut behind them, sealing them in. "Allow me to introduce Special Agent Robert Callahan of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Public Corruption Task Force," Brooks said smoothly, gesturing to the man in the suit. Callahan didn't smile. He merely gave a slow, predatory nod. Davis immediately went on the offensive, puffing out his chest. Chief Brooks, what is the meaning of this? If this is an internal affairs matter regarding my officers, protocol dictates that I lead the inquiry. You cannot bring federal agents into my precinct without briefing me first. You are gravely mistaken about two things, Captain Davis, Brooks replied, stepping forward. The dark, unyielding intensity in her eyes made Davis instinctively take a half step back. First, this is no longer your precinct. And second, this is not an internal affairs matter. This is a federal criminal investigation. Harlan felt a cold bead of sweat roll down his spine. He glanced at Cooper, who was now trembling visibly. Investigating what? Harlan demanded, trying to inject his usual gravelly authority into his voice, though it cracked slightly. We haven't done anything. We've been out there keeping this city safe. Keeping it safe? Brooks repeated, a dangerously soft edge to her voice. She turned to Detective Jenkins. Detective, would you please show Officer Harlan how he keeps our city safe? Jenkins pressed a button on a remote control. The large flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall hummed to life. The screen displayed a crystal-clear, high-definition full-color video. It was Arthur Pendleton's auto body shop. The angle was from above, looking down at the garage floor. The time stamp in the corner read the previous evening. The audio kicked in, painfully loud and perfectly clear, captured by the hidden parabolic microphone. I said turn it off, rookie. Unless you want me to write you up for insubordination. We're having a private conversation with a business owner. It's a technical malfunction, got it? Harlan's own voice echoed off the concrete walls of the interrogation room. He felt the air get sucked right out of his lungs. He stared at the screen in abject horror as the video played out his entire extortion of Arthur Pendleton. Every shove, every threat about city inspectors, every demand for the tax. It was all there. Indisputable. Devastating. You pay the tax or I shut you down. Have it by tomorrow night or I'm putting you in handcuffs for resisting arrest. Are we clear? The video paused on Harlan's smiling, arrogant face as he walked away from the terrified mechanic. The silence in the interrogation room was deafening. It was the sound of a 15-year career built on bullying and corruption evaporating into thin air. That's, Harlan stammered, his mind racing desperately for a lifeline. That's an illegal recording. You can't use that. We were inside a private business. You need a warrant for audio surveillance. That's fruit of the poisonous tree. Captain Davis jumped on the lifeline. He's right, Chief. If you planted a bug without a judge's sign-off, this whole thing is inadmissible. And as head of internal affairs, I am formally throwing this evidence out. Agent Callahan finally spoke, his voice dry and laced with contempt. You're not throwing anything out, Captain, because you don't have the clearance to even look at the paperwork. Callahan reached into his inner suit pocket and pulled out a folded document, tossing it onto the metal table. Title III wiretap warrant, Callahan stated, authorized under the Hobbs Act for extortion under color of official right, signed by Federal Magistrate Judge Thomas Patrick. It completely bypasses local jurisdiction, local courts, and your corrupt little internal affairs department. It's airtight, Officer Harlan. We own you. Harlan staggered back until his shoulders hit the cinder block wall. His chest heaved as panic truly set in. He looked at Davis, but the captain was staring at the federal warrant on the table with wide, terrified eyes. Davis knew a sinking ship when he saw one, and he was already trying to figure out how to scramble for a lifeboat. Chief Brooks, Davis said, his voice rising in desperation. You can't do this. I am a decorated captain. You have no proof that I knew anything about this. Actually, Richard, we do, Agent Callahan said, stepping in front of Davis, because Detective Jenkins also secured a warrant for your personal bank accounts. We found the offshore LLC where Harlan has been depositing a 20% kickback from his street collections. You aren't just covering for him, Captain. You're his business partner. Davis's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His knees buckled slightly, and he had to grab the edge of the metal table to keep from collapsing. The architect of Oak Ridge's corruption had just been checkmated by the woman he thought was merely a political prop. "Captain Davis," Brooks said, her voice devoid of any pity, "you are hereby stripped of your police powers, suspended without pay, and remanded into the custody of the FBI, pending federal racketeering charges." Agent Callahan signaled, and 2 more federal agents stepped into the room from the hallway, smoothly placing Captain Davis in handcuffs and reading him his Miranda rights. Harlan watched his ultimate protector get hauled out of the room like a common street thug. He was entirely alone. There was no union rep coming to save him. There was no judge he could buy off. The hallway incident, that one arrogant, cruel, racist decision to kick a woman he deemed beneath him, had triggered an avalanche that had just buried his entire life. Chief Brooks turned her full, unrelenting focus back to Harlan. "Officer Vance Harlan," she said, every word dripping with the heavy weight of justice long denied. "For extortion, assault under color of authority, intimidation, and civil rights violations, give me your badge and your gun." Harlan's hands shook violently. He slowly reached down to his duty belt. He unsnapped the holster, drawing his service weapon, and placed it on the metal table. Then, with agonizing slowness, he unpinned the silver shield from his chest. The shield he had used as a weapon against the vulnerable for 15 years, and set it next to the gun. "Turn around," Detective Jenkins ordered, stepping forward with a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. Harlan turned and placed his hands behind his back. The cold metal clamped down on his wrists, ratcheting tight with a sharp metallic click that echoed through the room. "You're making a mistake," Harlan whispered, though all the venom was gone from his voice. He just sounded broken. "I gave 15 years to this city." "No, Harlan," Chief Brooks corrected him, stepping aside to let Jenkins lead him toward the door. "You took 15 years from this city. Today we take it back." As Harlan was walked out of the interrogation room, through the bullpen, and past the shocked stares of dozens of his fellow officers, he finally understood the woman in the courthouse hallway hadn't been an obstacle in his path. She had been the brick wall he had been speeding toward his entire corrupt career, and the impact had utterly destroyed him. Chief Nadia Brooks stood in the doorway of the interrogation room, watching Harlan disappear into the back of a federal transport vehicle. She reached down and briefly rubbed her right shin, where the phantom ache of the bruise still lingered. The pain was still there, but as she looked around the precinct, now painfully aware that a new standard had just been ruthlessly enforced, the air in Oak Ridge suddenly felt a little bit cleaner. The reckoning had come, and justice was finally sitting in the big chair. 8 months later, the air inside the United States District Court felt entirely different from the humid, chaotic county courthouse where Vance Harlan had once played God. Here, the mahogany walls absorbed the sound, the ceilings were vaulted and intimidating, and the federal seal behind the judge's bench served as a silent, heavy reminder of absolute authority. Vance Harlan sat at the defense table. He was no longer wearing his crisp, heavily starched tactical uniform. He wore a faded, oversized, orange jumpsuit issued by the Federal Detention Center. He had lost 15 pounds. His skin was pale, his posture slumped. Without his badge, his gun, and the blind backing of a corrupt union, he looked remarkably small. He looked exactly like the terrified defendants he used to laugh at. The trial had been a bloodbath. Harlan had foolishly refused a plea deal early on, arrogant enough to believe that a jury of his peers would somehow sympathize with the tough realities of policing. He was wrong. Assistant United States Attorney Melanie Croft had systematically dismantled his defense. She didn't just play the 4K video of him extorting Arthur Pendleton. She paraded a line of witnesses to the stand. Rookie Bradley Cooper, desperate to avoid a lengthy prison sentence, had testified for 3 grueling hours, detailing every illegal shakedown, every fabricated arrest report, and the toxic culture of fear Harlan had cultivated. Even worse for Harlan, Captain Richard Davis, the man who had sworn to protect him, had flipped. Facing his own crushing racketeering charges, Davis had handed the FBI the financial ledgers, proving that Harlan Street extortion was part of a larger organized criminal enterprise. Judge William Caldwell, a man known for his zero-tolerance policy on public corruption, looked down at Harlan over his reading glasses. The courtroom was dead silent. In the second row of the gallery, sitting quietly and taking notes, was Chief Nadia Brooks. "Mr. Harlan," Judge Caldwell began, his voice echoing like thunder in the large room, "in my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a more egregious abuse of the public trust. You were given a badge to protect the vulnerable. Instead, you weaponized it to terrorize them. You operated under the delusion that the law did not apply to you, that the uniform you wore was a shield against accountability." Harlan stared at the polished wooden table. He couldn't bring himself to look at the gallery. He couldn't look at Arthur Pendleton, who was sitting with his wife. And he absolutely could not look at Chief Brooks. "Your actions have not only destroyed your own life, but have deeply fractured the community's trust in the Oak Ridge Police Department," the judge continued. "Consequently, under the federal sentencing guidelines for Hobbs Act extortion and civil rights violations, I am sentencing you to 144 months, 12 years in federal prison, Harlan." Harlan closed his eyes as a collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. 12 years. Hard time. "Furthermore," Judge Caldwell stated, striking the final lethal blow to Harlan's ego, "as your crimes were committed under the color of official right, you are hereby stripped of your municipal pension. The funds from that pension will be liquidated to pay immediate court-ordered restitution to Arthur Pendleton and the other business owners you systematically robbed." The gavel came down with a sharp, echoing crack. It was over. The hard karma had finally circled back. Harlan had kicked a woman in a hallway to make himself feel big, and in return, he had lost his freedom, his career, his finances, and his future. As the federal marshals approached to take him away, Harlan was forced to stand and turn toward the gallery. For a brief, agonizing second, his eyes met Chief Nadia Brooks. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply gave him a slow, acknowledging nod, a silent confirmation that the debt he incurred in that county courthouse hallway had been paid in full. Then she closed her leather portfolio, stood up, and walked out of the courtroom. She had a city to run. Back at the Oak Ridge precinct, the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The oppressive boys' club culture that had suffocated good cops for a decade was dead. Chief Nadia Brooks stood in the main assembly room, the exact same room where she had shocked Harlan 8 months prior. The officers were standing at attention, but this time the fear was gone, replaced by a cautious, growing respect. "Today, we close a dark chapter in this department's history," Chief Brooks announced into the microphone. "We are no longer an occupying force. We are public servants. And to ensure that the blue wall of silence remains permanently dismantled, I am officially promoting Detective Elena Jenkins to the rank of captain. She will be taking over the newly restructured Internal Affairs Division." A genuine wave of applause broke out across the room. Captain Jenkins stepped forward, accepting her new brass. The officers, who had kept their heads down for years, finally felt like they could breathe. The predators had been purged. Later that afternoon, Chief Nadia Brooks walked through the front doors of the Monroe County Courthouse to file a standard budgetary brief. She walked down the same long, echoing corridor. It was still crowded with public defenders, nervous families, and exhausted citizens. A young officer was walking briskly down the hall, holding a stack of files. A civilian was sitting on a bench, their feet slightly extending into the walkway. Brooks paused, watching. The officer didn't shout. He didn't kick. He simply smiled, stepped around the civilian, and said, "Excuse me, sir. Have a good afternoon." Chief Nadia Brooks smiled, clutching her portfolio, and kept walking. The system wasn't perfect yet, but the rot had been cut out. Justice wasn't just a word in Oak Ridge anymore. It was the new reality. The fall of Officer Vance Harlan is a chilling reminder that arrogance is a fragile armor, and absolute power is an illusion that can be shattered in an instant. He thought he was untouchable, but he failed to realize that true authority doesn't shout, bully, or kick people when they're down. True authority observes, builds a flawless case, and strikes when you least expect it. Chief Brooks didn't just fire a bad cop. She surgically dismantled a corrupt system, proving that nobody, no matter how protected they feel, is above the law. If this story of justice and poetic karma moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button to help it reach more people. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. What would you have done in Chief Brooks's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.